Hello. Today we'll be talking about federalism. What is federalism? Federalism is a system of government in which the powers are divided between the national and state governments. What this means is that we have 50 state governments, but we also have a larger federal government. These sets of government are separate. However, they do have a relationship to each other. It is in the 10th Amendment that our federal system is established. It says that any powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the states. So, federalism allows and encourages policy variations or differences between the states. Why is this a good thing? Well, ultimately, we recognize that many communities, states are different than their other states. Meaning the people in California are not the same as the people in South Carolina or the people in Minnesota. We differ, and therefore our laws should differ too. So the advantage is that it allows local action in matters of local concern and national action in matters of wider concern. It's good that the federal government deals with the defense, whereas it's good that our local communities can decide whether at what time our bars should be open till, what zoning should be allowed, what kind of houses we want. Some things are better kept to the states, while others are better kept to the national government. Therefore, the laws vary from state to state because social, political, and economic conditions are somewhat different in different parts of the country. The economy of Florida is a lot different than the economy of Washington. We have, for example, Google is based out of California. And so California might have much more detailed laws on technology companies than would possibly the state of Arkansas, which is not known for that. Areas of law that can and will be different from one state to another. That's what policy variations are. However, laws can be similar as well. Let's look at some examples. We look at taxes. Here, on the bottom left, you look at gasoline taxes. State of Wisconsin is 32.9 cents a gallon of tax, 32.9 cents of tax per gallon. Whereas in Illinois, it's almost 39 cents a gallon. Therefore, it's better for people in Beloit to buy their gas in Wisconsin than in Illinois. But then if we look at, down on the bottom right, we look at cigarette tax. Cigarette tax is another way that policy varies from state to state. Illinois' cigarette tax is lower than Wisconsin's cigarette tax. Ultimately, this means that it's better for the citizens of Beloit to buy their cigarettes in South Beloit because of cheaper taxes. We look at voting. There's differences in age, registration process, residency. You see here in the bottom left, you see how many days before an election a citizen has to register in order to vote in the upcoming election. In Illinois, that's 30 days. Wisconsin, it's currently 28 days, but we still have something called same-day registration, something that few states have, meaning that you can walk into the polls on election day, register to vote, and vote at the same time. This leads to a higher turnout in voting. Gun laws. In the top right, you'll see it's a simulation that deals with gun laws. What that is, what we talk about is right to carry. Currently, the only state that does not allow someone to carry a concealed weapon is the state of Illinois. This is where we stood as of 1986, whereas this is today. And so states will determine at what age can you buy a weapon. In Wisconsin, you have to be 18 to get a rifle, and you have to be 21 to get a handgun. What type of firearms are allowed also vary from state to state. Education. At what age can you drop out? Wisconsin, we have 18, 16 in some states. That's what we see here. That depends on the priorities of the state. In a state like North Dakota, we see that you can drop out at age 16. What that state has said is that they put a higher priority on upper teenagers being able to start working for their families as opposed to finishing their education. Whereas in Wisconsin, the priority is on finishing your high school education. We think of the required courses that you must take in order to graduate high school. We think of how long the school year is. All of these things differ from state to state because states are different from one another. Think of driving laws in terms of age, speed limits, seatbelt laws, blood alcohol content. Can you have an open container of alcohol in the car? Here we see at what age you can begin to drive. South Dakota, you can legally drive a car at 14 and a half years, whereas in Illinois and Wisconsin, it's at age 16. The most prohibitive is New Jersey at 17. And so here we think of what do these communities think is a responsible age for their citizens to start driving at? Something to consider. Marriage and divorce. Age of consent, who can marry? We do blood tests to determine is there a blood relation amongst those who are possibly getting married? How does property work in a marriage? Do you need to wait? How can you go through a divorce process? Here you see a link that takes you to is same-sex marriage allowed in certain states? So that's another policy variation that you must consider. Alcohol and drugs, you see down here which counties are considered dry. Although prohibition, which was ended with the 21st Amendment, allows for the alcohol or the sale of alcohol, it's still allowed that counties can decide whether or not they want to be able to sell alcohol within their county lines. We think of, is there a Sunday sales ban where you can't purchase alcohol on a Sunday? Things like that. We also think of how long can bars be open to, and where and when can things be sold. Punishments and crimes is another example. Here you see on the top right the death penalty as of 2009, I want to say, and you see the amount of executions that each state has had. Texas is by and far the biggest executor amongst the states. You see the comparison between where they were as of 2007 to where they were in 2009 or 10 when this was made. The states in beige, in the grayish color, are states that don't have death penalty. Illinois just joined them in 2011. And so different states can decide, do we think we want to administer the death penalty? Some states have said yes, others have said no. When we think of gambling, what types of gambling are allowed, where are they allowed, riverboat gambling versus a regular casino. What do states want to have in order to protect what their values are? Welfare. How much welfare can you get for how long? Who can receive it? By welfare, we're talking about maybe WIC checks, money for people to buy food, food stamps, things like that. Here you see about abortion. States have decided at what age can young women get abortions without having to notify their parents. Where can they get it? Do they have to wait a certain amount of time between when they sign up and when they can get it? Some states have said you have to look at an ultrasound of the child in the womb. So, some things to consider. We think about licensing, hunting, fishing, daycare, teaching. For example, any teacher that gets their teaching degree from the state of Wisconsin, whether that be a UW school or any other program, they'll probably use that teaching license to teach in another school. But what each teaching license says, or what you have to do to complete it, varies from state to state. All right, so ultimately we have delegated powers. There are some powers that are granted to the national government and some that are for the state governments. And we'll get to that. The three types of delegated powers are expressed, which are those who are actually written in the Constitution, such as delivering mail, declaring war. Those that are implied, powers that are interpreted and expanded from the express powers. If we can declare war, we should be able to, pay for the supplies they need, their housing, things like that. And then there's inherent. It belongs to the national government just because it is the national government. Reserved powers are the powers kept and held by the states. Some of those powers include the powers to define marriage laws, gambling laws, licensing laws, as we've shown. Very important concept is that local governments, such as the city of Beloit or Rock County, get their powers from the states. The state of Wisconsin, with its legislature in Madison, could decide tomorrow that the city of Beloit, well, sorry, but you're no longer a city. They can do that. There are exclusive powers, powers granted only to the federal government, declare war, enter into treaties, things like that. Then there are concurrent powers. This is a very key idea. These are powers shared by both the national and state governments. Here we think about education, to some degree marriage. We think about a whole host of things, drug and alcohol laws. And then F, we have the supremacy clause. This is one of the biggest ideas in this section. It says that the U.S. Constitution stands above all other forms of law. It is the supreme law of the land. So if a state law conflicts with federal law, the federal law always wins. States cannot be beyond the jurisdiction of the Constitution. That's not how our government works. Interstate relations. Framers knew they needed to address the problems and issues facing the divided states. These constitutional provisions were included to promote cooperation between and among the states. Key among them, we have the full faith and credit clause. What this says is that each state must honor one another's public acts, civil laws, records, and court records. These are birth certificates, high school diplomas, driver's license, etc. Meaning that if a guy and a girl gets married in Wisconsin, the state of Illinois is going to recognize that marriage license, and vice versa. Here we talk about extradition. It's a legal process in which a fugitive from one state is returned to that from another state. If I break the law in Wisconsin and run over to Illinois, Illinois will return me to Wisconsin. There's the privileges and immunities clause. It says that a resident of one state may not be discriminated against unreasonably by another state. And so there are reasonable discriminations. We look at out-of-state fees for college tuition. If any of you are looking into going to a state school that isn't in Wisconsin, maybe University of Illinois, University of Minnesota, you're going to be charged more, what they call out-of-state fees. Just like a resident of Illinois would be charged more to go to UW-Madison. Why is this? Well, the education system at these state schools are based on property taxes that residents of Wisconsin and every other state respectively have been paying into, so it wouldn't be fair. All citizens must obey the laws of all other states while in those states. Ignorance is not an excuse. You cannot just say, I was not aware that that was a law. That is not valid. We are also allowed to sue, a person is also allowed to sue persons/groups from a different state. Last one we have is interstate compacts. And these are agreements between states over common concerns or needs. Highway construction, prisons, parolees, police support. For example, you think of the interstate that runs right through Beloit, goes through Illinois, Wisconsin, a lot of states. If the states of Illinois and Wisconsin wanted to make some kind of new facility or structure that was on both sides that dealt with the interstate, these two states would have to figure out who's paying for what, etc. Same go for prisons. Wisconsin's prisons are pretty near capacity, so we'll send a prisoner to a different state. In exchange, that state will take that prisoner and will give them a certain amount of money in exchange for taking it. Ultimately, federalism is about the relationship between the states and between the state governments and the federal government. Thank you and have a great day.